So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 2022 LAS Collaborators Day Webinar. My name is Allison Wilson, and I'm the Principal Investigator for LAS, and we are delighted to have you with us here today. Just so you know, we will be recording the webinar today, and we will be making the webinar and the slides that we present available on the LAS website following the webinar. To get started, what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk just a bit about the logistics for today's webinar and go over the agenda. I'll give a brief introduction to LAS, and then I will turn it over to a number of my colleagues who will talk in more detail about the white paper process and about some of the specifics of the technical areas that we're interested in working on this year. So if I could have the next slide, please. The people that you'll be hearing from today are me, the LAS Principal Investigator, Dr. Matt Schmidt, who is our LAS Director of Programs, Dr. Christine Brew, who is one of our LAS Technical Program Managers, and Dr. Yasha Swisher, who is another of our Technical Program Managers. So next slide, please. So I wanted to start off with some information on how to contact us. So if you have general inquiries about next year's work, about LAS, or about anything that you hear today, you can always reach us by email at lasoutreach@ncsu.edu. If you have specific inquiries that you think that I might be able to address, or that Matt might be able to address, you can email us directly, and our email addresses are shown there on the screen. All of the information that we are going to talk about today is also available through the LAS website at ncsu-las.org. You can follow the events menu to get to these specific pages to see more about the call for white papers, about today's Collaborators Day, and about some of the other things that we'll discuss as we move forward during the webinar. Next slide. So what we would like to ask you to do, just to keep things straightforward for us, is if you have a question, we would appreciate it if you could use the Q&A feature in Zoom, as opposed to putting it in chat. So again, we would appreciate the Q&A feature. Some of the questions we will answer directly in the Q&A, but some of the questions we will answer live if we think that they would be of interest to the broad set of participants who are here today. We will have multiple places in the talk where we will pause and answer questions from the Q&A. But if you are unable to ask your question today, if you don't get an answer that really addresses what you need, please email lasoutreach@ncsu.edu, and we'll be sure to get back to you individually. So next slide. So our agenda for today. I'm going to spend just a moment giving you a brief overview of what the Laboratory for Analytic Sciences, or LAS, is and how we work. Then we are going to go into an overview of the 2023 LAS areas of interest. We will then cover the white paper submission process in some detail. And again, all the way through, we will be taking questions and answers through the Q&A function in Zoom. So just to start, what is LAS? So the sentence that we have here is kind of long, but let me read it and then unpack a few things that are important. So the Laboratory for Analytic Science is a mission-oriented academic industry government translational research collaboration, and we work at the intersection of technology and tradecraft. So there's several things there that I want to speak about just a bit. So when we talk about being something mission-oriented, that means that the problems that we take on are really focused on solving problems that are of interest to the intelligence community. As we go through the rest of the webinar, we're going to try to give you an idea about how the research themes that we are interested in fit in with those interests. We are a collaboration between people who work at universities, so faculty and students, industry partners and industry staff, and government staff, both researchers and analysts. Here at LAS and here on the NC State campus, we have roughly 40 government folks who work with us full-time, and we'll be engaged with you as you work on any project you do with us helping you make sure that the problems that you take on do address problems that are of direct interest to the intelligence community. When we say we're a translational research organization, what we mean is that we are interested in not just doing the basic work, but actually then thinking about how we can apply that work to answer the questions that the intelligence community has. And we are interested both in thinking about some of the interesting research questions, but also in thinking about how we might impact the process or the tradecraft of intelligence analysis. So next slide, please. So as we are thinking about this, there are really three ways that we think about what we're doing and what you should be thinking about as you're developing your white paper. We are very interested in investigating technical approaches with the potential to address analysis challenges. We're interested in developing analytic tradecraft that will leverage research and technology to address those mission needs. And we want to transition that technology, that new research, and the tradecraft and processes to our government partners who can operationalize that and hopefully scale the work that we do into solutions for the enterprise. So just to give you an idea of about how many people we work with in a particular year, this year we are working with 32 faculty from 14 different universities. We're working with 7 industry partners. And as I mentioned, we have about 40 government civilians who work with us as their full-time job here at the LAS. And there are about 12 full-time NC State employees, 4 of whom you'll actually hear from on the webinar today. So next slide. And we just have some logos up from all the folks that we are working with this year. And if we could move to the next slide. What I'd like to do now is I would like to turn this over to Dr. Matt Schmidt. Matt is our Director of Programs, and he's going to lead the next portion of the webinar.
Thanks, Allison. So I wanted to talk a little bit before we got into the technical areas that LAS is interested in, of just giving a little bit of an overview of how LAS works and how LAS projects work from a day-to-day perspective. So next slide. So the LAS working model is really built around the concept that Allison laid out, where we're trying to work on projects that are mission relevant. We're trying to produce outcomes that have the potential to translate to operational applications. And so in doing that, when we're looking for projects and partners from the academic and industry domains, we're looking for projects that have the ability to integrate the LAS staff and the government staff who are here at LAS. So that is the way that we really have a lot of the effect of actually making things mission relevant, is to work with people who understand mission problems, who work with people who understand the operational domain and can help tailor the project. So when you're thinking about the project, I want you to be making sure that you're thinking about how would this engage the LAS staff who could help shape that project to be maybe more mission relevant or more applicable to the operational environment. That said, when we're looking for our academic and industry collaborators, it's important to remember that 90% of the LAS work is completely unclassified. So we do most of our research in the unclassified domain. And then a lot of the work that is classified is around thinking about how we translate that and how we potentially transition that to an operational domain. Next slide. So when we're thinking about LAS projects, what are we actually looking for in terms of outcomes? The first thing I want to highlight in terms of what outcomes LAS projects are looking for is we are very interested in tangible outcomes, right? Things like papers or code or prototypes, things that capture the progress that the project made towards an objective, right? We aren't expecting that all projects are going to create an operational tool, but having something tangible can really capture how much progress we've made towards that potential objective. And also those tangible projects really enable others to build on what's been developed at LAS, right? Whether it is our academic and industry partners taking work that they did with LAS and further developing it through additional partnerships or through their own internal research and development, or whether it's our government stakeholders taking things that are coming out of LAS and further refining them into more operational products. If we don't have something tangible at the end of an LAS project, it's very hard to do those types of efforts. So next slide. So what exactly are we talking about in terms of tangible outcomes? Well, the good news is it spans a wide range of outcomes, right? So we are always interested in projects that have the potential to produce research papers, produce experimental data that can lead to further analysis. But we're also interested in new concepts, right? And those new concepts often are captured through things like storyboards or conceptual workflows, things that can get kind of quick feedback on this might be something that could have an effect, or this could be something that has an impact, or this isn't, right? This is something that's been tried before. This is something that wouldn't work in an operational domain. Those types of conversations can really help shape where the research needs to go. And then finally, we are very interested in outcomes that actually demonstrate capabilities, right? So things like proof of concepts or even working prototypes where we can show that yes, or we can demonstrate that yes, this is a capability that can exist. We can demonstrate it on some level of test data or some level of demonstration data that doesn't necessarily have to be operational or classified data, but something that actually answers the question of yes, like this has the potential of working and producing a significant impact. Okay, next slide. So that's kind of what we're looking for in terms of projects, right? And we're talking today to kind of help our potential collaborators think about how they want to frame the white papers as they're submitting. So what are we looking for in terms of collaborators? So one of the objectives of the lab, right, is to broaden the potential knowledge base of the US intelligence community and our government stakeholders by looking and engaging with the research communities and the industry communities who are working on very similar problems, right? So if you have been working in an area and you've been able to demonstrate expertise, that's something that we're really looking for. Being able to demonstrate a history of publishing or a history of producing code to the effect of a certain capability, that's something that is very relevant. We are looking for collaborators who are open to having those collaborations with the LAS staff and with the government staff. So we are going to set up projects so that the project team will have LAS staff on it. And when that happens, right, the project is going to shift a little bit. You're going to have capabilities and backgrounds that you maybe weren't expecting when you wrote the white paper. And that's okay, right? That's something that we allow for sort of iteration on what the approach is or what the objective is, and really try and enable that engagement with potential end users and people who really own the problem of what are the approaches that might work here, right? So we're looking for those collaborators who are interested in taking advantage of that opportunity. And then finally, we're looking to widely diversify the set of ideas and skills that are necessary to solve these problems, right? A lot of the discussion will touch on things like machine learning and AI and statistics and data science, and that's okay. We are very interested in those areas, but we're also interested in the areas around the humanities and the social sciences, people who can understand, you know, the user perspective and what's needed by the operational users. Those diverse skills, when we talk about the different problem areas and different technical areas, keep an eye out of, like, if you think that your skill set has an application there, we would be interested in hearing you talk about that. Okay, next slide. So how are we going about finding new collaborators? Well, or collaborators for next year? Well, that's what the whole white paper process is about. So as many of you have seen, we released our written call for white papers on June 6th. That call is also up on the LAS website. That is a thorough description of the technical areas that we are interested in for 2023. Today is Collaborators Day, where we'll go a little bit more in depth into some of those areas and be able to answer some questions about the process and everything like that. We are going to get a little bit more into what we call office hours after we talk about the technical sessions. But if you take away anything from today, remember that July 29th is our deadline for white paper submissions. If you would like to work with LAS in 2023, you need to submit a white paper, whether you are an existing performer or whether you're someone who is not currently working with us, but would like to work with us next year. Once we have those white papers, we'll go into an evaluation process and try and notify people of selection by the end of September. And then we will get into a little bit of how we do kickoffs and iteration at the end of the talk. Okay, next slide. All right, so we're going to get into the technical areas real quick, but before we did that, I did want to ask Allison, are there any questions in the Q&A that have come up that we would like to answer live?
There are. I have 3 questions that I think we'll address right now. So the first one is one that I think I'll take, and the question is, what is the ratio of submissions to awards? And of course, we're looking at that historically, but that ratio tends to be in about the 10 to 15% range. So, 10 to 15% might be awarded based on the total white papers submitted. That question also had some questions about budget, but that's something that Matt's going to address in more detail later in the webinar. So the next question is about whether foreign nationals can participate. So Matt, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, and the short answer there is yes. There is an additional logistical step that we need to follow, which is basically there's a form that needs to be filled out once we know that a foreign national intends to participate on a project, and then there's a slight delay after that between 1 week to a month. So there is a logistical step that we need to make sure we do before the project starts. But if you know that you have a foreign national on your team, or you yourself are a foreign national and you are selected, we will have plenty of time to get that started before the start of period of performance in January.
Okay, and then the final question that we've gotten a few times is, I know you'll address this later in the webinar, Matt, but could you talk briefly about whether you can submit a proposal with more than one PI?
Yes, and again, the short answer there is yes. When you submit a proposal, we ask that you list all of the PIs that you would like to be funded by the proposal. So that doesn't mean that you have to include everyone that you would like to work with on the proposal, but if you would like co-PIs or multiple PIs on the project, we ask that you include them on the paper, but we have no limit on the number of people that are funded by a single project.
Okay, and with that, let's keep going, and then we'll have some more time for more questions coming up shortly.
Okay, so then next slide. Okay, so we are going to go into a little bit more depth about the technical areas that we work in at the lab. We have 3 general themes that we work with, or that we are interested in at LAS. One is what we call operationalizing AI and machine learning, and Yasha Swisher will talk a little bit about that. The second is human-machine teaming, and Christine Brew will talk more about that. And then the third is what we call content triage, and Yasha will also explain a little bit more about what that is and what we're trying to do there. So I will turn it over to Yasha, and we get started with the operationalizing AI and machine learning.
Okay, thanks, Matt. So first, Matt described these as 3 different themes, and that's a good way to think about it, rather than being 3 really distinct silos where your work has to fall into one, but not any of the other 2. There's a good amount of overlap between all of these areas. And in particular, a lot of the projects in all of the areas that we support are going to end up involving machine learning in one way or another. For the operationalizing ML area specifically, we're looking to support work in a couple of different focus sub-areas. First, we're going to be looking for projects that are focused on improving the efficiency and reducing the costs associated with running machine learning workflows in production. And can we move on to the next slide, please, by the way? Thank you. And I'll talk about some specific examples here in a moment. Also, as we described in the call for white papers, under this area, we also group projects involving research into several specific topics where improvements in the state of the art of machine learning might give intelligence analysts an asymmetric advantage. Briefly, those topics are first, reasoning over knowledge graphs, basically trying to find practical ways to draw non-trivial conclusions from large volumes of graph-structured information. Secondly, work on detection of deepfakes, mainly in images, video, and audio. And third, research into personalization and recommendations for individual analysts, highlighting information relevant to an individual analyst that might otherwise be missed. Sorry, I'll try to speak a little more slowly. This last area, the one about individualizing and personalizing recommendations for analysts, is intended to be aligned with the themes of our ongoing summer camp in applied data science, which is happening right now, and which is bringing together staff from government and academia to work on this problem. Each of these specific topics are described a little bit more in the call for white papers, but if you're interested in proposing work on one of these topics, I'd encourage you to reach out to me individually through the LAS outreach email, which we can get forwarded on to me, and to be sure to attend one of the upcoming office hours sessions that we'll be having coming up in July. The other focus area for operationalizing ML is supporting work that in one way or another is aimed at driving down the costs of adopting ML in production. There's been a lot of research into ways to make training ML models more efficient. We've supported quite a bit of this type of research over the years, and we continue to be interested in this area, as you'll see with some of the examples I have coming up in a second. But we'd also be interested in work that targets efficiency at inference time, research into ways to achieve results that are maybe close to state of the art, but that require radically less infrastructure to run in production. Shifting back to the left and looking at model training time, here the resources that we're often most concerned about are the human resources that might be required in teaching the model what it is we want it to do. Here we're often looking at ways to get models to incorporate some very niche domain knowledge that in the wild is often expressed in languages other than English. And the people who have this knowledge, the folks who already know what we'd like to get captured in a model, they usually have a lot higher urgency things to be doing with their time besides labeling model training data. So we have previously, and we continue to be interested in work that reduces the burden on these people. There are lots of approaches that are being explored here. One class of approach is weekly or semi-supervised learning. An example project that we've supported in this area is work from a couple of years ago that was done by Crunch Cyber. They produced a software package that adapted the Snorkel weekly supervised labeling framework to work well in providing labels for net flow and other similar categories of data that come up in cybersecurity applications. Another area is zero-shot or few-shot learning. We've had a couple of projects exploring applications in different domains here, but admit largely on the strength of the logo, I wanted to highlight a workshop that we put on together with Pacific Northwest National Lab, which provided a training opportunity for federal government staff to learn more about and get a chance to apply these techniques. And then finally, another potential approach here is data augmentation or synthetic data generation. We supported research published at NIPS last year that ended up establishing, for a particular use case, the benefits of data augmentation with synthetically generated counterfactual statements. So synthetic text that express the opposite polarity or valence to the original source text. So there are a few different topics we're particularly interested in under this umbrella. For our next broad area, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Christine Brew, to talk about our interests in human-machine teaming.
Hey everyone, as Joshua said, my name is Christine Brew and I am another one of the technical program managers at LAS. And today I'm going to be talking with you about the human-machine teaming area of interest. If you're following along in our white paper document, this is section 3.2. So we approach this from the concept that the landscape of analysis is rapidly advancing toward the integration of new technologies to form human-machine teams with the goal of achieving top performance in analysis. Human-machine teaming envisions a world where analysts no longer have to spend their time telling machines what to do. However, developing appropriate technologies to meet the needs of analysts relies on a robust understanding of user behavior as an analyst interacts with tools to complete their mission. Next slide, please. By studying human-machine teaming, we want to improve how automation can help analysts. Through interdisciplinary research, we want to understand people's experience with teaming technologies and how to create technologies that alleviate analyst pain points and reduce cognitive load. Technology may reduce the burden associated with analytic tasks like content triage, but for it to be effective, we need an understanding of how humans actually incorporate new technologies into their workflows. Within this area of interest, we focus on two main points. The first being modeling the user from their interaction with a tool or system. This means that we want to understand users' cognitive processes for a task and consider how system design will best support these processes. This includes reducing cognitive burden in search, triage, and decision-making. And the second perspective is developing models of user activities and applying those within use cases. Here, we want to apply general research on how people make decisions to the analytic space. We want to examine how people's trust in automated systems is considered when making decisions or taking certain actions. Further, we want to understand how and why users engage or do not engage with technologies and how systems can be designed to better meet the needs of users. Next slide, please. We have three examples here, short blurbs of currently funded work in this area. And these include a project looking at construction of workflow graphs from activity logs, where they are making predictions about likely next activities to offer suggestions to analysts doing a similar task. Another project is looking to develop a framework for understanding how the level of automation of a system may impact performance outcomes, given defined inputs and measurements of disruption to workflows. And a third project is looking at prototyping methods to better support how analysts consume and make use of data or information in their workflows, leveraging a particular model of analytic cognition. In conclusion, if you're interested in engaging further with us on human-machine teaming topics, we'd invite you to sign up for one of the office hour sessions hosted by our team, or like Yasha said, reach out to our LAS outreach email and they can connect you with me and other members of that team for further conversation. And with that, I will back to Yasha to cover our final area.
Okay, thanks, Christine. So I'll be talking now about content triage, which is an area that requires maybe a little more explanation than most, but the overall concept is actually fairly intuitive. When we talk about triage or data triage, we're talking about a process where an analyst is trying to find relevant information within a potentially large corpus of documents. The documents could be of various types, like text, audio, images, or video, and maybe you could be looking for one specific fact in a needle in a haystack type situation, or maybe you're doing something more exploratory, where you're not looking for any one specific thing in particular, but you probably recognize relevant information when you see it. These sort of tasks are actually fairly common across many domains, though intelligence analysts likely are working on data triage tasks more often than most people. And these problems obviously have a great deal of overlap with the field of information retrieval, though we think that other disciplines likely have quite a bit to contribute here as well. Now, when we talk about content triage specifically, the distinction we're drawing is with searches based on metadata, which would be any of the structured or semi-structured information about a document that's separate from the document itself. So if you're searching your inbox for an email and you're searching based on who sent it or when it was sent, we say you're searching based on metadata. But if you're doing a full text search, you're searching based on content. Now, from this description, you might or might not be surprised to hear that content triage is not a fully solved problem. It's true that pretty good tools exist in the text domain, and for the case where you already have a pretty good idea of what it is that you're looking for. But even within text, messy documents still pose a problem. These could be things like dialogues or conversations in which many different topics are discussed, but only one topic is truly relevant to you, or text that's been automatically transcribed from spoken audio with errors introduced along the way. Outside of text, for other media types, content search is still fairly limited. And the question of how to define interfaces to best support exploratory search when you're trying to find relevant information in an I'll know it when I see it type situation is still pretty wide open. We've previously supported a number of projects in this area. If you could go ahead and advance, please, to the examples. These examples are the graphs prototype from UNC, which demonstrates a novel combination of faceted search and clustering of related topics, and the PADI system from Semantics we've been working with to evaluate the effectiveness of the document clustering interface shown here on poorly transcribed speech audio data. So that wraps up our overview of the technical areas of research that we'll be looking to support in 2023. This part of the presentation should hopefully align fairly well with what you can read in our call for white papers. And again, we'll be having office hours sessions running throughout the month of July where you can ask questions and engage with us more directly. But for now, we'll pause here briefly to see if there are any general questions we can address for the benefit of everyone. And then we'll move on to the next section of the presentation, where we'll be discussing how the submission process will work operationally over this next month or so.
And so there are some questions that have come in the Q&A that we are actually about to address. So one of those questions is about how to get more information. Again, the easiest way to do that is going to be to send an email to lasoutreach@ncsu.edu. But coming up on the next slide, Matt is also going to discuss the office hours that we'll be holding, where you'll have the opportunity to sign up for a time and chat with some of the folks who are talking with you today and some of the other technical experts here at LAS. In addition, we've also had a number of questions about the format of the white paper. So I will refer you to the call for white papers, which is available through the LAS website at ncsu-las.org. But we will also spend a portion of the webinar talking in some detail about the length of that and the topics that you will want to cover. Okay, with that, Matt, back over to you.
Okay, thanks, Alison. So the remainder of the talk today is going to be just around logistics and sort of what things are coming up in terms of timelines. So if we can go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, the timeline after today, the next thing that we will be doing are what we call office hour sessions, and I'll get a little bit more into what those are and how those will work. But those will happen the 3 weeks after July 4th. So July 5th through the 22nd, we are going to have various office hour sessions. That'll lead up to the white paper submission deadline of July 29th, and then I'll get more into what exactly needs to be submitted and how we need to submit it here in a second. And then, as I mentioned, we intend to do notifications of acceptance by September 30th with the goal of doing kickoffs by the start of the new year. Okay, next slide. So we are going to have what we call office hour sessions again this year. And office hour sessions are really a time for you to meet and have a more in-depth discussion than would be possible in a webinar and a Q&A session like this. So we will have multiple LAS staff in each of the office hour sessions and really just take time to focus on a discussion of your particular questions or your particular work and how it might align with some of the technical interests of LAS and technical themes at LAS and how that might impact things you might want to include in the white paper. You do need to sign up for a office hour slot or multiple office hour slots. And the way that you will do that is through the ncsu-las.org website. If you go to the events menu, you can find it through there. If you go to the call for white papers webpage, there's a link there. There's multiple ways to get there, but so if you go to the LAS website, you'll be able to find it. Those signups will go live immediately following this webinar. And then, as I mentioned, we'll start the office hour sessions the week after the 4th, or the week of the 4th. Okay, next slide. So we're going to have 2 types of office hour sessions, and I just wanted to distinguish them here a little bit. So the first type is what we call operational office hours. Those will be primarily with myself, Allison Wilson, our Director of Operations at LAS, and those will be places for you to ask questions about sort of the logistics of how to work with LAS. So questions about IP, questions about the white paper process, questions about how funding works. All of those questions we can talk through specifics, we can talk through whatever specific scenario you might have with your organization or with your research group. We also are able to give you some guidance in those about how your research interests might align with the 3 research interests that we've described so far. That can help you find what other technical office hours you might want to sign up for. We currently have 3 60-minute sessions scheduled, one on Tuesday, July 5th, one on Wednesday, July 6th, and one on Thursday, July 7th. As I mentioned, you can sign up for those through the LAS website. Next slide. So the complement to the operational office hours are the technical office hour sessions. Again, you would be able to meet with LAS staff, but this would be LAS staff that is more, let's say, technically engaged or technically knowledgeable in the different research themes. So these will be both NC State and government staff at LAS who are either currently doing research in these themes or are interested in potentially partnering with new projects along these themes. And they give you the opportunity to talk with them about where there might be some mutual interests or where you might have related interests. We ask that you don't consider these to be pitch sessions, right? These are not going to be the same people that are going to be evaluating the white papers, but they can help you figure out how your interests align with LAS interests in a way that can help you tailor your white paper to the different LAS interests. These office hour sessions will be 15 minutes, and so each theme will have 3 90-minute sessions. And if you go to the next slide, here's the schedule. This will also be available on the website. But for human machine teaming, we have office hours scheduled on Wednesday, July 6th, Monday, July 11th, and Tuesday, July 12th. For content triage, we have sessions on Thursday, July 7th, Tuesday, July 12th, and Monday, July 18th. And then operationalizing AI and machine learning are on Monday, July 11th, Thursday, July 14th, and Friday, July 15th. Next slide, please. Okay. So once we've had all the office hour sessions, you've been able to talk to some of the LAS staff and gotten a little more detail about how your interests might align. Then it's really on you to do the homework of actually writing and submitting a white paper for potential projects and project ideas. So again, just reiterating, if you would like to work with LAS, you need to submit at least 1 white paper. You can submit more than 1 white paper, and in fact, we do ask you to submit multiple white papers if you are actually interested in proposing different projects. Each project idea should have its own unique white paper. That helps us when we're doing the evaluation and selection. If you have a project and would like to involve multiple PIs, you can. We just ask that you list them on the white paper, and when you write up your budget justification, you include the budget for each PI. Next slide. So white papers can be submitted through the online white paper submission tool at LAS. And so the URL is listed here. It's whitepapers.ncsu-las.net. It's also listed in the call for white papers. Just note that this is a .net account and the LAS website is a .org, so that can sometimes trip people up, but I promise you that this is the correct URL. Each white paper should include the 6 pieces of information listed here. So that includes a title, all of the funded PIs, as well as the main point of contact, right? So if you have multiple PIs, just make sure that you select one person to be the main point of contact. We ask that you submit an abstract, and we'll talk a little bit more about the abstracts. We would prefer the abstracts be something that you are okay being distributed widely. We do sometimes share the abstracts of the white papers with people so that we can get a little better sense from our stakeholders of what areas they might be interested in. And so please do not include any proprietary information in there, and please try and write your abstract in a way that it can be shared and distributed broadly with our government stakeholders. The fourth thing we would ask you to include is a budget request, and we'll get a little bit into typical budgets for LAS projects here in a few slides. But just noting that the title, the PIs, the abstract, the budget request, all of those are going to be entered separately into the white paper submission tool. Your actual white paper is really consisting of a technical description and a capability description. And we'll talk a little bit about what those are in the next slide. But just to reemphasize, whether it's the abstract, whether it's a technical description, whether it's a capability description, please do not include any classified, proprietary, or sensitive information of any kind. We are not set up to handle classified submissions for white papers, so please do not submit anything that has that. Please do not submit any proprietary information. We're not set up to handle that as well. Okay, next slide. So for the technical proposal, there is a lot of detail about what to include in the technical proposal in section 5.2 of the call for white papers, which again, you can find on the website. But generally, we're looking for 4 things in the technical description. So the first is we would like you to describe the proposed effort. So what is the research question you're answering? What is the problem you're trying to solving? What is the capability you're trying to demonstrate? The second is how you plan to approach that, right? And we understand this is a 2-page white paper. You're not going to be able to get fully into details, but giving some sense of your proposed approach is very helpful in our evaluation. The third thing is something we want to emphasize is we do intend to integrate LAS staff into the projects that are being proposed. So if you have ideas about how you might make use of the opportunity of working with LAS staff, please include those in the description. All right, so if there are things that it would be really helpful for you to talk with a operational intelligence analyst, or it'd be really helpful to be able to talk with someone who understands, the capabilities of an operational environment. Make sure you mention that and make sure you give us some sense of how you might want to work with the LAS staff. The fourth main thing to include in your technical proposal is, of course, what specific deliverables you are expecting from the work. So what are the tangible outcomes that you expect from the work? The fifth bullet there is just to note that in addition to the technical description, we do ask that you submit a capability statement. So that would be a real short description, 1 page or less, of your background, your capabilities, or your organization's capabilities, If you have a website that you can link to, that's great, but please do that in addition to writing up the capability statement, not as a replacement. So next slide. Okay, so just guidelines on the structure of your white papers. White papers should include the technical description, right? And that can be a max of 2 pages, as well as a description of your relevant capabilities and resources. That can be a max of 1 page. White papers should not include classified, proprietary, or sensitive information of any kind. Again, I cannot reemphasize that enough. Please do not do that. And then the last thing is information about the budget. We do ask that you submit that through the white paper submission tool and not as part of the PDF in your technical description or capability statement. And it'll be pretty obvious when you go to the tool where you need to write up the budget. Next thing. So when we get to writing up the budget, what budgets are we looking at? LAS typically awards for our academic partners, standards awards are typically in the range of 1 month of summer salary or academic release for the academic PI, and funding to fund 1 12-month graduate student or GRA. In addition to that, we include $3,600 in other direct costs, right? So that can be money for travel to a conference, that can be money for hardware that's needed for the project. That would just be sort of the default award. If you have multiple PIs, you can request months for each of those PIs, as well as grad students for each of those PIs. But we do take that into consideration when we are thinking about funding. The award, we list it as funding equivalent to 1 12-month graduate student. It can be used to fund postdocs or undergrads, but we do ask that it's at the same range as what a 1 12-month graduate student would be. You can submit additional scope options when you're writing up the technical proposal of in the range of 1 additional grad student each. We just ask that in your technical proposal, you make sure to document what the additional scope would be if you are able to get the additional grad student. So that would be the standard academic award. When you're writing up the budget request, you can write up simply as requesting standard award, and we will know that that means 1 month of summer salary, 1 grad student, $3,600 in direct costs. If you want something different, just make sure you differentiate that in the budget request. Okay, next slide. For industry partners, our standard award is $250K or less, and that should include all direct and indirect costs. Likewise, you can submit additional scope options at an additional $100K each. So you can submit ideas for $350K, $450K, and $550K. And again, we ask that you differentiate those in your technical description as well. If that level of effort doesn't seem appropriate for what you had in mind, we do have the potential of discussing alternative arrangements, but you would probably need to reach out to myself to discuss what those other options are. Okay, next slide. So the last slide is just kind of giving you a sense of how we evaluate the white papers. And really, it's exactly as what's listed here. When we're looking at the white papers, we do a thorough check on technical soundness and technical capabilities. But really, we're looking at, is this a project that would have an impact, right? Is it something that would have an effect on intelligence analysts, or a positive effect on intelligence analysts? Does it demonstrate innovation? Is this something new, or does it utilize some new capability? And engagement, right? Are there places for the LAS staff to engage and integrate with the work, with the potential project? So make sure that you are emphasizing those when you're writing up the technical proposal. And that should be everything. I think if you go to the next slide, we'll pause one last time for any open questions. So Allison, are there anything that hasn't been answered in the Q&A?
There are a couple things. So the first one is you've been describing the white papers as really talking about 1 year of work. If someone thinks that their project might actually take longer than a year, is there a way that they should indicate that, or how would you like them to address those thoughts within the white paper?
Yeah, I think so. If the expectation is that the work would likely take longer than a year, it should be noted in the technical proposal. But we would ask that you also differentiate what would be expected by the end of year one. And that can be simply, we would be able to produce a technical report or something like that. We will only be able to evaluate white papers based on what's proposed for 2023. The additional years would be helpful context, but the actual evaluation would be limited to the year proposed.
Okay. So the next thing I would like to do is there were a number of questions around abstracts, deliverables, budget kinds of things. So I would like to just mention a few things, and then I'll let Matt elaborate on what I'm saying. So one thing that Matt mentioned about the abstract for your white paper. So let me sort of talk operational and then strategy. So operationally, the abstract is submitted through our submission tool separately from the rest of the white paper. So don't repeat it. You've only got 2 pages. You don't need to put it at the top of your white paper. So that's sort of the pro tip on how to get yourself a little more space. But what I would say is the abstracts are read very, very carefully. Spend a lot of time on your abstract and make sure that it is thorough and that it addresses the issues that Matt brought up. So the abstract here is something that is a very important part of your submission. Matt, do you want to emphasize anything else about the abstracts?
No, I think that's, I'd agree with all of that.
Okay. The second thing I want to talk about is budgets. And again, I'm going to refer you back to the call for white paper. But one thing that you should remember is that we are not asking for a full budget proposal as part of the white paper submission. We are asking for something very short and very straightforward. If you are an industry participant, we're asking just for a rough order of magnitude. So in the budget, we are asking for something like 250K, 350K, 250K plus a 100K option as described in the white paper. At this time, we are not evaluating full budget proposals. If we are interested in moving forward with you, we will request that full budget proposal. Again, for academics, we are interested sort of in the discussion. So it would be, 1 month of faculty support plus a GRA would be what we want to know about your budget right now. Just as a note for the academic performers, we do pay full F&A and indirects on these awards. So Matt, any other things that you want to amplify about the budget?
No, again, please read the call for white papers. It has all of these details in it as well. And if you have more questions, feel free to sign up for one of the operational office hours.
So the last thing that I want to address very briefly is, Matt mentioned deliverables. That's another thing that you should spend some time thinking about as you're putting together your white paper. It is very, very important in our evaluation for us to understand what you are going to produce. So that might be a software prototype, that might be a research paper. But again, we do want to emphasize that this work does require the production of deliverables at the end of the year or throughout the year. And so please make sure that it's very easy for us to find the specifics of what you are intending to produce as part of your project. So Matt, if you want to address that.
Yeah, everything that you just said, agreed and seconded. And the last thing I would mention is one thing that the lab does annually is at the end of the year, we have a year-end symposium where we do ask for people to put together either a video or a poster describing that year's effort with LAS. So that is considered a deliverable, but it is something that we ask of all projects. So we do ask that there is something in addition to that year-end poster or year-end video. Okay.
So Matt, there are a few other questions. So could you talk a bit more about the ways that LAS staff might engage in a project, and any thoughts on how you might capture that in the proposal, and potentially the role of the office hours in helping to clarify that for anyone who's interested in seeing the white paper?
Yeah, so I think I'll start with the last part of that question first, which is the office hours are a great time to get some ideas there, right, about how the interests align and what ways in which either the research that's currently ongoing at LAS might engage, or some of the interested researchers might engage as well. So that is a great venue for getting some ideas. I can talk to some historical examples of how LAS staff has engaged before. So there's a lot of times where the LAS staff has operational experience, and so they can help kind of give a user perspective on how a capability might be used, or what things they would like to see in a capability that might help shape a research direction. They can be very good at sort of doing quick iteration, right, of figuring out where that intersection is between what's possible and what's useful. And so that's one way that the LAS staff can be helpful. There is a significant amount of expertise in the LAS staff around AI machine learning, around language analysis, around information extraction, things like that. And so if there are places where, you know, some of the techniques in, say, natural language processing may be applicable, but it may require some better understanding of what the operational constraints are, it can be helpful to talk with an NLP expert who understands sort of the operational domain of where these things might be applied, what sort of technical constraints might exist. That can be really helpful as well. So those are two that I can think of right offhand of examples. I might open it up to Yasha or Christine if they also have examples they wanted to bring up now, but it's also something we can talk about during office hours. Okay. So yeah, I would just say if you'd like to talk more about those things, I would again highly recommend scheduling a office hour session.
And one of the things we've been doing a bit in the chat is answering some fairly specific questions about the format of the contracts, about invoicing and the terms of invoicing and things like that. Those are questions which we would encourage you to submit to LAS Outreach, or those would be exactly the kinds of questions that would be great for the operational office hours that are being held July 5, 6, and 7. We will have our contracting specialists there, and we can talk in more detail about some of the details about how some of that might work. So Matt, I think we have either answered the questions live or we've had a chance to respond directly in the Q&A. So last call to folks who are on the webinar for any additional questions that you'd like to put in the Q&A. Pending that, we do want to encourage you to ask additional questions at LAS Outreach at ncsu.edu. Check the events tab at ncsu-las.org to sign up for office hours. And One of the questions about office hours is you don't have to sign up with specific staff. Instead, you're signing up around specific topics. So if you have operations questions like invoicing and contracts, those are the operational ones. The other office hours are organized around the research themes. So if there's a particular area of expertise that you have and you have a technical question, you would sign up for one of those and we'll make sure the appropriate folks are there from our side. So the next question, Matt, that we had is about formatting and the white paper. Are the technical description and the capability description two separate documents? Or one document, one is 2 pages, one is the 3rd page?
They are 2 separate page sections, right? So you can submit one document where the technical description is in 2 pages and the capability description is in 1 page. But we do ask that you separate them in some fashion. So yes.
So, and then, so again, the total for your white paper is 3 pages, 2 pages of technical, 1 page of capability. All of that is detailed in the call for white papers. There is a question about whether the Q&A will be released. And I will do the best I can to capture it. But if we are not successful and you weren't able to see the answer to your question, please do submit your question again through lasoutreach@ncsu.edu, and we'll make sure that you get a response. And so the next question, Matt, is one for you, which is, will we get feedback on our white paper if it is not accepted?
So we typically can't provide feedback immediately after the response. That time we have to do a lot of logistical things to get the overall LAS proposal submitted. And so if you would like feedback on your white paper, I would ask that you give us probably until the new year before we can actually take the time and schedule things. We do capture all of the comments as we're going through the evaluation process so that we can go back after a couple months and go through just what comments were made and what the feedback was. But it's just a process that we have to push a couple months after the actual notification for it to be feasible. So don't expect direct feedback when if you get a negative response in September, but feel free to reach out after the new year, and we can set up a time to go through the feedback.
So, I do have a couple of additional questions to answer in the Q&A, but I don't see other questions that are necessarily something we need to answer broadly. Actually, I take that back. So Matt, one question that we are getting in the Q&A is, do we have samples?
Do we have samples of white paper submissions?
Of white papers. Mm-hmm.
We do not currently have samples available. I think the answer is no on that one. Yeah, we do not currently have samples available.
Okay, and I think that's all of the questions that we have in the Q&A.
Okay. Well, thanks again to everyone who stuck around, and we hope to see you during office hours and get to read your white papers. Thanks.